The story is etched into our collective memory. A titan of steel and ambition, a floating palace named Titanic, declared by its creators to be practically unsinkable. It was the largest moving object ever built by man, a monument to a new age of technological certainty. And on its maiden voyage, it sailed directly into legend by way of a catastrophe. The official story is simple, clean, and tragic. A chance encounter with a mountain of ice in the dead of night. But what if that's not the whole story? What if the iceberg wasn't the killer, but merely the weapon? For more than a century, we've been captivated by the tale of hubris, of a ship so grand its owners skimped on lifeboats, so confident was their faith in its design. We know the details by heart. The night of April 14th, 1912, the calm, freezing waters of the North Atlantic, the multiple warnings of ice fields ahead tragically unheeded, and then at 11:40 p.m., the fatal scrape. A silent, colossal iceberg tearing a series of holes along the ship's starboard side. The damage was too great. The supposedly watertight compartments, the very feature that made the ship unsinkable, were breached one by one. In less than 3 hours, the grandest vessel in the world slipped beneath the waves, taking more than 1,500 souls with her. It was a tragedy of epic proportions, a stark lesson from nature to the arrogance of man. This is the story we all know, but it's a story built on a foundation of secrets and lies. The official inquiries concluded it was an act of God. But for decades, a small group of researchers, experts, and maritime historians have been troubled by inconsistencies in the record. The most persistent is Irish journalist Seanan Moloney. For over 30 years, he's been hunting for an answer to a nagging question. How could a ship built to withstand a head-on collision be brought down so quickly by a glancing blow? The answer, he believed, wasn't in the water, but in a fire that had been raging deep within the ship itself. Moloney's investigation led him to a holy grail of Titanic research, a previously unknown private album of photographs. These weren't grand publicity shots, but candid images taken by the ship's chief electrical engineer before it ever left the Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast. They documented the final days of the ship's construction, and hidden within them, on a photograph of the Titanic being towed out to sea, was something no one had ever noticed before, something that would change the entire story. There, on the starboard side of the hull, just above the waterline, a faint but distinct discoloration. When Moloney enhanced the image, it became undeniable. A massive 30-foot-long black streak marring the fresh paint of the brand-new ship. It wasn't a shadow. It wasn't a reflection. It was damage. And most chillingly, its location was a direct hit, precisely in the area where, just 10 days later, the iceberg would strike. This single photograph poses a terrifying question that unravels the entire official narrative. What could have caused such a significant mark on a brand new ship? And if the Titanic was already damaged, why was it allowed to sail? The official story tells us the ship was perfect when it left port. This photograph screams that it was not. It suggests the Titanic wasn't the victim of a random accident, but was a disaster waiting to happen, sent to its doom with a fatal pre-existing wound. The black streak was the external symptom of a far more dangerous problem. According to an analysis by thermodynamics experts from Imperial College London, the mark was caused by a massive uncontrolled fire burning inside one of the ship's 3-story-high coal bunkers. Spontaneous combustion in coal stores was a known risk, but the scale of this fire was unprecedented. It likely started as early as 3 weeks before the voyage and was left to burn, reaching temperatures of up to 1,000 degrees Celsius or 1,832 degrees Fahrenheit. At that temperature, steel becomes brittle. The fire was cooking the very skeleton of the ship. The analysis concluded that the prolonged, intense heat robbed the steel hull of its strength, reducing its resistance to impact by a staggering 75%. The Unsinkable ship in this one critical area had been turned to glass. Even more critically, the fire was raging directly against Bulkhead E, one of the key watertight walls that was supposed to prevent catastrophic flooding. The fire was compromising the ship's last line of defense. This catastrophic fire was no secret. It was an open secret among the crew, and it was even mentioned during the official 1912 British inquiry. But the testimony was deliberately downplayed by the man in charge, Lord Mersey. Historians note that Mersey was a shipping interest judge, a man with deep ties to the industry he was supposed to be investigating. He systematically shut down lines of questioning about the fire, ensuring the final report would blame the iceberg alone. It was a textbook cover-up. But the testimony survives. Charles Hendrickson, a leading fireman, told the inquiry that the damage to the hull was visible and that officers ordered a deliberate concealment. In his own words, he saw the warped metal where it had been red hot and was told to get some black oil and rub over it. They weren't fixing the damage, they were hiding it from the Board of Trade inspectors who had the power to deny the ship its passenger certificate. They painted over the evidence of a fire that was still burning below. Even more damning was the testimony of lead stoker Frederick Barrett. He was one of the men tasked with fighting the fire for days. He testified that the critical watertight bulkhead behind the fire was visibly damaged. He described the massive steel wall as being dinged aft and dinged forward. It was warped, buckled by the incredible heat. This was the very wall that needed to hold back the ocean in the event of a breach. And the crew, the officers, and the owners knew it was compromised. The fire explains the final fatal piece of the puzzle, the Titanic's reckless speed. The ship was traveling at nearly 22 knots, almost full speed, through a known ice field at night. Why? Not to break a record, but out of desperation. The only way to control a coal fire is to remove the fuel. The stokers were ordered to shovel the burning coal from the bunker directly into the ship's furnaces. They were trying to empty the bunker before the fire spread further. In their attempt to solve one crisis, they were propelling the ship headlong into another. So when the iceberg appeared out of the darkness, the collision was no longer a matter of chance. It was an inevitability. The iceberg struck the ship on the starboard side, in the exact 30-foot section that had been weakened by the fire. The brittle, superheated steel offered no resistance. It fractured. And behind it, the buckled, heat-damaged bulkhead, which should have held, gave way. Water flooded, not 4, but a fatal 5 compartments. The unsinkable ship was now mathematically doomed. The sinking of the Titanic was not an act of God. It was not a simple story of man versus nature. It was, in the words of Sean and Moloney, a perfect storm of fire, ice, and criminal negligence. The decision by the White Star Line and its chairman, J. Bruce Ismay, to set sail with a known, uncontrolled fire and a structurally compromised hull was not an oversight. It was a calculated risk. A risk taken to avoid the financial loss and public relations disaster of delaying the maiden voyage of the world's most famous ship. The iceberg has dominated the story for over a century, a convenient, blameless villain. But the evidence now shows it was merely the final instrument in a disaster set in motion weeks earlier by human hands. The true cause of the sinking wasn't frozen water, but a toxic combination of corporate greed and a deadly disregard for safety. The 1,500 people who perished in the icy Atlantic were not just victims of an accident. They were victims of a secret that the ship's owners took to their balance sheets and a fire they allowed to burn all the way to the bottom of the sea.